Why were Roman soldiers so much better than everyone else? A military layer cake history spanning millennia. The Roman Legion. Just hearing the name is enough to make countless military enthusiasts, historians, and even the general public stand in awe. How did a small city-state from central Italy rise to become a vast empire spanning 3 continents? How did their military might crush almost every contemporary opponent? This was no accident, nor was it mere luck. The victories of the Roman legions were built upon an incredibly rigorous, systematic, and frankly anti-human military machine, imagine if you will. Living centuries before Christ, what was warfare like back then? Most armies were simply hastily conscripted farmers and craftsmen, armed with whatever swords their local blacksmith had just forged, clad in colorful, rudimentary outfits, and lined up in loose, scattered formations. The general would give a shout, and everyone would charge forward, fueled by raw courage and gut feeling. The battlefield was a chaotic, disordered place, rife with chance. This so-called tactic was more like organized chaos, or perhaps a large-scale community brawl. And then came the Romans. They didn't just accept this chaos, they saw it as a problem to be solved. They embarked on a seemingly impossible mission to upgrade warfare from a primitive mosh pit to an industrialized precision slaughter. They didn't believe heroics could win wars, they believed in systems, engineering, discipline. Today, we're diving deep into how the Roman legions managed to inflict a sense of dimensional crushing despair, both psychologically and physically, upon their enemies. This isn't just history. It is an ultimate tutorial on ancient military systemic upgrades. One of the most terrifying hallmarks of the Roman legion was its standardization. It was like the ancient world's version of everyone gets an iPhone, but it was fully loaded and all models are identical. While other civilizations were still bogged down in trivialities like, what are you using and what about me? The Romans had already optimized their military equipment, training, and tactics to the extreme one, the unified gear arsenal. Everyone's a military competition MVP first. The equipment the standard Roman soldiers load out was something other armies couldn't match. Gladius short sword, this wasn't for show. At about 50 centimeters long, it was designed for close quarters thrusting in a crowded battlefield. You can't swing wildly. A precise short sword, however, could open flowers on your opponent's chest. This thing was the ancient equivalent of a tactical scalpel, precise, deadly, and less prone to jamming. Pilum javelin, this was the real black tech. A heavy javelin with a specially designed soft iron tip. Once thrown, it would bend upon hitting a shield. Imagine your enemy's shield bristling with bent iron rods. How do they pull them out? They can't. They have to ditch the shield. Even crazier. Once thrown, it is useless as a spear. You can't just pick it up and use it like a javelin. This made it impossible for enemies to counter. It was the ancient equivalent of a disposable strategic weapon. One volley could decimate the enemy and couldn't be recovered. Scutum shield, not some flimsy little buckler, nor the seemingly fancy but impractical wooden boards from television shows. The Roman scutum was massive, rectangular, and covered the entire body. Its design was ingenious, reinforced with metal edges. It could not only block attacks, but even be used for shield bashes to knock enemies flying. When hundreds of these shields locked together to form the testudo, tortoise formation, arrows, stones, and even close combat blades struggled to penetrate. It was the ancient equivalent of an infantry tank, impenetrable lorica segmentata, segmented armor. This armor consisted of multiple metal plates connected by leather straps. This design balanced protection and flexibility. Soldiers wearing it had most of their bodies effectively shielded while maintaining relative freedom of movement. This was far more practical on the battlefield than cumbersome full-plate armor. This standardized equipment brought several revolutionary advantages: max training efficiency. When soldiers used the same gear and practiced the same movements, training efficiency grew exponentially. They didn't need to adjust tactics based on personal preference or weapon differences. Everyone was executing an optimized set of actions. Max logistics and maintenance, weapon damaged. No worries. Every camp had a standardized parts inventory, allowing for plug-and-play replacements and repairs, drastically reducing costs. It is like the advantage of a modern assembly line. Interchangeable parts, efficient production, max tactical coordination. When everyone used the same gear and executed the same techniques, their tactical synergy reached new heights. Everyone knew what their comrades would do, how their equipment would interact, making tactical execution as smooth as flowing water. This was basically the ancient equivalent of the Apple ecosystem. Everything designed for seamless integration and coordinated combat too. Helm mode standardized training, forging soldiers into human weapons. The strength of Roman soldiers wasn't innate. It was forged through extremely brutal training. Their soldier drills were essentially the founding fathers of modern special forces boot camps. 30 kilometers forced marches daily. This wasn't a leisurely stroll. Soldiers had to march long distances over rough terrain, carrying heavy gear, weapons, armor, food, tools. Up to 30 kilograms total. After the march, they faced rigorous inspections of posture and equipment. This went beyond mere physical training. It was a challenge to the limits of both body and mind. Poke 'em moke against wooden posts every day. Soldiers practiced thousands upon thousands of thrusting drills until their arms ached and went numb. This monotonous repetition wasn't about building six-pack abs. It was about embedding combat movements deep into their muscle memory, making every thrust an instinct 24/7 survival mode. Roman soldier training went far beyond just combat skills. They also learned how to rapidly dig trenches, build camps, and even construct fortifications. This meant when a Roman army arrived at a new location, they weren't just a fighting force, they were also an efficient construction and logistics crew. After such purgatorial refinement, a Roman recruit wasn't just as strong as an ox, but their ability to take orders reached silent mode. On the battlefield, they could execute commands without hesitation, maintain formation, and keep fighting even when utterly exhausted. This wasn't training soldiers. It was programming killing machines. 3. Lego-style tactical modules, every piece a masterpiece. The most praiseworthy aspect of the Roman legion's tactical system was its modular nature. They weren't a massive, rigid entity, but were composed of detachable, reconfigurable combat modules. Legion, the core fighting unit of about 5,000, 6,000 men, the flagship of the entire military system. Cohort, the first-tier department of a legion with 10 cohorts per legion, each around 500, 600 men. Century, the office under a cohort, about 8,100 men. Note, despite the name century, the actual number usually ranged from 8,100, a testament to Rome's flexible management. This Lego-style structure provided immense tactical flexibility, endless tactical variations. When defense was needed, cohorts could easily form an impenetrable shield wall for offense. They could quickly transform into a sharp wedge formation, piercing the enemy line like a dagger. When encircling an enemy, several cohorts could be detached to flank or rear attack, controllable losses. Because legions were composed of relatively independent modules, if a specific cohort or century suffered heavy losses, it wouldn't lead to the collapse of the entire legion. Other modules could quickly fill the gaps and continue the mission. It was like a large application. Even if one feature has a bug, the whole app doesn't crash. This was true distributed warfare. While opponents were still using broad, one-size-fits-all tactics, the Romans were already playing the modular combo with a subtlety and efficiency that other civilizations could only dream of. Rome's secret weapon engineering prowess. When the battlefield became a construction site beyond their formidable soldiers and tactics, the Roman legions possessed another secret weapon, their unbelievable engineering capability. Roman soldiers weren't just warriors, they were battlefield architects and engineers. 1. Instant construction on the battlefield. A villa district every night. When Roman legions finished their march for the day, their most important task wasn't finding a place to camp. It was building houses. Not just pitching tents, but constructing a complete set of fortifications, digging ditches, 3 meters wide, 2 meters deep. This wasn't child's play, it was a solid barrier. Building ramparts, earth excavated was piled up to form thick walls, increasing height and mass. Erecting palisade fences, sharp wooden stakes were densely planted on the walls. Forming chevaux-de-frise, obstacles to deter enemies. Constructing watchtowers. Watchtowers were built at advantageous points, allowing soldiers to observe enemy movements from above. Standardized camp layout. The internal camp layout was also meticulously planned. tent arrangements, pathway designs, assembly points all followed strict standards, ensuring soldiers could quickly find their positions and enter combat readiness in emergencies. The whole process typically took only 2-3 hours. This meant that when Roman armies arrived in unfamiliar, even hostile territory, they could be housed in a fortress as solid as a rock before nightfall. Imagine an enemy attempting a night raid. They'd first have to cross the ditch, breach the palisades, climb the ramparts. By the time they'd exhausted themselves and stormed the camp, they'd be met by fully armed, alert, and ready Roman soldiers. This wasn't warfare, it was inviting the enemy into the trap, leading them into a desperate situation right at Rome's doorstep too. The Siege of Alesia, when siege became a defense-in-depth dollhouse, speaking of engineering marvels. We must mention the Siege of Alesia in 52 BCE. Vercingetorix, the Gallic national hero with 80,000 elite troops, retreated into a mountain fortress that was notoriously difficult to assault. The Roman commander Julius Caesar had only 60,000 men. Normally, Caesar might have opted for a prolonged siege, waiting for starvation or disease to weaken the defenders. But Caesar didn't. What did he do? He decided to use engineering to create a miracle. Caesar ordered his soldiers to build 2 concentric rings of fortifications. Inner wall, approximately 18 kilometers long, completely encircling the Alesia fortress, designed to prevent the besieged garrison from breaking out. Outer wall, approximately 21 kilometers long, facing outwards from the fortress, designed to defend against an incoming Gallic relief army of a staggering 240,000 men. Animation demonstrates how Roman troops rapidly constructed inner and outer fortifications in difficult terrain, effectively trapping the Gallic forces in between. And just like that, Caesar packaged Vercingetorix's 80,000 men and the 240,000 relief force between 2 massive rings of fortifications. Then, he simply sat back and waited for them to involute and starve. Ultimately, the relief army, after fiercely attacking the outer wall in vain, routed. The besieged garrison, starved and desperate, surrendered. Caesar, having lost hardly any men, achieved a decisive victory against overwhelming odds, annihilating nearly 300,000 enemies. Caesar, using the power of engineering, demonstrated the ultimate form of besieging without attacking, and the formidable construction capabilities of his soldiers. 3 Roman roads, the military highway network that conquered the world. The Romans' engineering prowess wasn't confined to the battlefield. They were also road-building maniacs across their vast empire. They constructed over 400,000 kilometers of roads. These roads were no mere dirt paths. They were masterpieces of engineering, layered construction. The foundation was laid with large stones for drainage. The middle layer consisted of gravel and concrete for stability and strength. The surface was paved with flat flagstones, durable and easy for marching. Durability: many Roman roads were built to such high standards that even today some sections are still in use after 2 millennia. Visuals: modern heavy trucks speeding on a highway, transitioning to Roman soldiers marching rapidly on a smooth Roman road. The strategic significance of these roads cannot be overstated. They were the empire's equivalent of a modern superhighway network, providing the Roman legions with unparalleled mobility on their own roads. Roman legions could easily the 30th of March 40 kilometers a day, and in some cases up to 50 kilometers. This meant that when a border region erupted in rebellion or came under attack, legions could reach the scene with astonishing speed, given the vastness of the Roman Empire. Its ability to maintain effective control and rapid response owes at least half its success to these military highways. They not only connected the empire, but also equipped the Roman legions with blitzkrieg capabilities. So the Romans weren't just fighters, they were engineers who could fight. They turned battlefields into construction sites and marches into infrastructure projects, giving them an edge no other civilization could match. Rome's ultimate BGM, discipline. When fear became efficient background music, we've discussed the standardized equipment and formidable engineering skills of the Roman legions. But this was only the hard power. What truly cemented the Roman legions undefeated status was their deeply ingrained soft power discipline. This discipline, with its sheer severity, could compel soldiers to unleash astonishing combat power even in the face of extreme terror. One end, the decimation, the most brutal internal reorganization. Within the Roman army, the punishment for desertion was incredibly harsh. When a unit like a sentry collectively broke and fled in battle, the army would implement a brutal punishment known as decimation. Here is how it worked: lottery for life or death. The entire unit of deserters would be assembled. Then, through a lottery, 1/10 of the soldiers would be randomly selected. Execution by comrades, the most horrifying part. The selected soldiers weren't executed by officers, but were beaten to death with clubs by their own 9 fellow soldiers. Animation simulating the decimation, emphasizing the extreme cruelty and psychological pressure of execution by comrades. Yes, you heard that right, to save their own lives. Soldiers were forced to personally kill their comrades. This was an extremely cruel form of psychological torture, making soldiers understand that the price of running away was far worse than dying in battle. While this punishment sounds barbaric, its effect was immediate and visible. From that point on, the soldiers in that unit would rather die than retreat when facing the enemy. They knew all too well that any hesitation would bring a punishment more terrifying than the enemy. It was like setting a failure penalty mechanism in teamwork, except Rome's penalty came at the cost of life to the triplex aces. The secret to full health revival forever. The Roman legion's formation design also reflected their emphasis on discipline and combat endurance. They employed the classic triplex aces, triple line formation. First line, hastati, typically composed of the youngest, most impetuous soldier. They initiated the battle, striking the enemy line with the fiercest assault. Second line, principes consisted of more experienced, physically robust soldiers. When the hastati grew tired after an initial engagement, or if gaps appeared, the principes would move forward to take over. Third line, triarii, usually the most seasoned and veteran soldiers, forming the legion's final reserve. In extremely dire situations, when the first 2 lines were locked in heavy combat, the triarii would enter the fray to turn the tide. Animation demonstrating the rotation of the triplex aces. First line soldiers orderly withdraw. Second line advances, third line waits in reserve. This formation ensured the Roman legions could always maintain an influx of fresh troops on the battlefield. While the enemy, after an initial fierce assault, was already exhausted, the Roman legions could deploy fresh units to continue the fight. This allowed the Roman legions to maintain the initiative throughout long and brutal campaigns. It was like playing a turn-based RPG. The Romans always had their main force at full health, while the opponent was constantly draining their resources. The matter has come down to the triaries. Res ad triarios venit. This Roman proverb meant things have gotten truly dire. It signified that the elite first and second lines could no longer hold, and only the last reserve could be deployed. But most of the time, the formidable first and second lines of the Roman legion were sufficient to win the battle. This near indestructible combat will, coupled with strict discipline, enabled Roman soldiers to act like programmed machines on the battlefield, fearless of sacrifice, fighting continuously. They didn't win through individual heroism, but through systematic combat processes and absolute obedience to discipline. Rome's fatal bugs, overconfidence when the grind king meets the hidden boss. Despite the Roman legion's military triumphs, any powerful system can have bugs. The Roman legion's fatal bug often stemmed from their extreme confidence, even bordering on arrogance. This confidence, under certain circumstances, led them to underestimate opponents, resulting in devastating losses. In 9 CE, one of the darkest chapters in Roman history unfolded in the Teutoburg forest. The Roman governor at the time was named Varus. He was an exceedingly arrogant, conceited Roman nobleman. He believed the Germanic tribes were merely barbarians in animal skins, unworthy of challenging the mighty Roman legions. Varus led 3 full legions, approximately 20,000 elite soldiers, deep into what is now Germany. His objective was to pacify these tribes he considered insignificant. Visuals. Imagine the arrogant Roman governor Varus pointing at a giant map, then soldiers being led into a dark, muddy forest. However, Varus made 2 fatal mistakes. Owen underestimated the enemy. He completely disregarded the combat capabilities of the Germanic tribes and their familiarity with the terrain. He assumed Rome's equipment and training were enough to crush any foe. To disdain the terrain, he actually led his well-trained, well-equipped legions into the complex, swampy terrain of the Teutoburg forest. It was like throwing elite amphibious assault forces into a mud wrestling match. The formation and tactics that the Roman legions relied on were almost impossible to execute in the narrow, uneven forest. Even more insidious, the Germanic chieftain Arminius, who himself had served in the Roman army, was well versed in Roman tactics and command styles. He deliberately created a false impression, luring Varus into this meticulously prepared death trap. Visuals: Germanic warriors emerge like phantoms from the dense forest, launching ambushes on the disoriented Roman soldiers. The scene is brutal and desperate. The result: the Roman legions' prized testudo and wedge formations became clumsy and slow in the forest. They were like dancers in heavy armor stumbling on a rough stage. The Germanic warriors, like ghosts, used their knowledge of the terrain to divide and conquer the Roman soldiers, defeating them piecemeal. For 3 full days, 20,000 elite Roman soldiers were annihilated. Varus himself committed suicide in shame. Upon hearing the news, the Roman Emperor Augustus was said to have painfully banged his head against a wall, shouting, "Varus, give me back my legions." This phrase became an eternal scar in Roman history. However, the Romans didn't collapse after this devastating defeat. They learned from the disaster. They recognized the folly of fighting on unsuitable terrain. From then on, the Roman Empire abandoned the conquest of Germania, firmly fixing its border at the Rhine River and establishing strong fortifications. Rome's overconfidence cost them dearly, but they also demonstrated their system's robust repair capabilities. Learning from failure and rapidly adjusting strategy. Rome's final countdown. System collapse when the grind king meets force majeure. The Roman legion's military machine was unstoppable for centuries, but even the most powerful system has its life cycle and design limits. The decline and eventual fall of the Roman Empire weren't because their military power suddenly weakened, but because the entire vast empire suffered system overload, combined with a series of force majeure factors that ultimately led to the collapse of this glorious machine. 1. Spread too thin, the border's bottomless pit. At its peak, the Roman Empire spanned an immense territory, from Britain to North Africa, from Spain to Syria, stretching for thousands of kilometers. This meant maintaining an extremely long and difficult to defend border. Imagine being responsible for security across 100 apartment complexes simultaneously. You'd find that even with numerous guards, covering everything comprehensively is impossible. The Roman Empire needed to deploy dozens of legions, over 150,000 soldiers, to maintain the security of its vast borders. Maintaining such a massive army incurred astronomical military costs, severely draining the empire's financial resources, arguably emptying the entire empire's treasury. 2. Currency devaluation crisis, when salaries became waste paper. To pay for the ever-increasing military expenses, the Roman government resorted to a desperate measure: devaluing the currency. They began reducing the precious metal content in coins to mint more money. The result was hyperinflation. The salaries soldiers received became increasingly worthless. Gold coins that were once enough to support a family comfortably might later only buy a few loaves of bread. Visuals: soldiers receiving meager salaries with worried expressions, then reluctantly watching market prices soar. When soldiers found their pay worthless, their loyalty began to waver. To survive, they started extorting civilians, robbing merchant caravans, and even joining bandit groups. Soldiers who once upheld imperial order became forces of destruction. 3. Political instability, the emperor's high-risk profession. The Roman Empire's political system became extremely unstable in its later stages, especially from the 3rd century CE onwards. Emperors were replaced at a dizzying speed, like a revolving door. In just 50 years, Rome experienced 26 emperors, most of whom died in civil wars or were assassinated. Visuals: scenes of bloody palace coups, soldiers proclaiming new emperors, then assassinating old ones. Chaotic scenes. The army's focus shifted from defending the empire's borders to engaging in brutal infighting over the throne. Various legions proclaimed their generals as emperors and then waged war against each other. This left the empire top-heavy. The power struggles in the center directly led to the loss of its borders. 4. Foreign invasions, when the barbarians also learned tactics. Most critically, the tribes once dismissed by the Romans as barbarians were also learning and evolving. The Goths, Vandals, Huns. and other groups were no longer disorganized hordes that knew only fierce charges. They began to learn Roman military organization and tactics, forming disciplined, organized armies. When these evolved enemies began assaulting the increasingly weakened and internally unstable Roman borders, the empire, like a hollowed-out giant tower, finally collapsed. Finally, in 476 CE, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire was deposed. 1,000 years of glory came to an end. Rome's eternal legacy, the immortal military code. The glory of the Roman legions was not a fleeting moment. Their military thought and practice profoundly influenced future generations. Why did the Roman legions rule the world for nearly a millennium? The answer lies hidden within their unreplicable military system. Standardization, like Apple's hardware uniform compatible. Efficient, allowing the entire system to operate stably. Engineering prowess, like NASA's infrastructure, able to turn any terrain into their home turf and provide unparalleled logistical support. Discipline, like a rigorous military code transforming fear into motivation, enabling soldiers to execute orders in any environment and maintain combat effectiveness. They proved an undeniable truth: organization triumphs over chaos, discipline surpasses courage, systems prevail over individuals. The influence of the Roman legions permeates modern military practices, modern armies' standardized training. The Romans were practicing it 2,000 years ago. Modular tactics. The Romans' Lego-style tactical combinations are the ancestors of their modern versions. Military engineering. The Romans had already turned battlefields into construction sites. This concept of integrating engineering with combat remains a vital tactical principle today. Rome was no mere empire. They were the developers of military science, the pioneers of warfare industrialization. They left the world not just magnificent architectural ruins, but also a profound combat algorithm. Their story tells us only a powerful system can bring lasting victory.